Today, we're taking a deep dive into a story that blends innovation, industry, and community right here in Baltimore. You've probably driven by it 100 times and never thought much about it, but the American Can Company in the Canton neighborhood holds a fascinating and even controversial place in history. The American Can Company didn't just make any cans. These are the cans that revolutionized food preservation and played a huge role in American industrial history. Stick with me and we'll explore how this factory impacted not only the food industry, but the working class neighborhoods around it and how it shaped the lives of thousands of Baltimoreans. I'm Evan, and this is the story of the American Can Company. Let's start by going way back to the late 18th century, long before the American Can Company even existed. The Canton waterfront was bustling with maritime activity, and Baltimore was a key player in America's shipbuilding industry, and you'd never know it by looking at the Safeway and American Can Company today. Imagine this parking lot in Canton was once a bustling shipyard. Colonel David Stoddard operated a shipyard here on Harris Creek, and in 1797 his shipyard launched the USS Constellation, one of the most iconic vessels in American naval history. It went on to serve in the Quasi-War with the French from 1798 to 1800, the Barbary Wars, and the War of 1812. Now, this ship is not to be confused with the sloop of war, the USS Constellation, that is docked in Baltimore's Inner Harbor. That ship was built in 1854, and researchers have determined that only a small amount of materials from the original 1797 frigate were used during its construction. But as the years went on, Baltimore evolved and so did its industries. By the late 19th century, the city was poised to become a national leader in a very different kind of manufacturing. One that would change how people ate, stored food, and lived their daily lives. This very building that I'm standing next to would play a central role in that transformation. So how did we go from shipbuilding to can making? Well, by the late 1800s, Baltimore had grown into a major industrial city thanks to a strategic location as a port and the proximity to agricultural regions. By this time, canned food was becoming a major technological advancement. Why? Because before canning, the only way to preserve food was drying, salting, or pickling, which didn't always work well. Canning, though, that was revolutionary. The American Can Company was officially formed in 1901, but the factory here in Baltimore dates back a bit earlier. It was constructed for the Norton Tin Can and Plate Company in 1895 to meet a growing demand for canned goods. The company was part of a national effort to revolutionize food preservation, and Baltimore was a natural fit as a hub for the industry because it was close to farms, the Chesapeake Bay, and transportation networks. Now here's where it gets interesting. The American Can Company didn't just start from scratch. It was the result of a merger, a big one. In fact, it brought together over 60 small regional can-making companies under one giant corporate umbrella that was known as the Tin Can Trust. And this wasn't just any merger. It was a creation of a near monopoly on can production. If you brought a canned good in America in the early 20th century, there's a good chance those cans were made by the American Can Company. It's safe to say this company had a massive impact on the canning industry. They introduced a level of standardization and efficiency that had never been seen before. One of the company's early leaders, Edwin Norton, spearheaded efforts to streamline the production process, bringing cutting-edge technology into the mix. This included automated can sealing machines that reduced production costs, making canned goods more affordable and available to the masses. These innovations didn't just make cans cheaper, they also made food safer. Before these kinds of advancements, improperly sealed cans were a public health hazard. Botulism outbreaks were not uncommon due to poor sealing and contamination. The American Can Company's standardized practices help eliminate a lot of these issues, making canned foods a staple in households across America. And because Baltimore was already such a big player in the seafood and agricultural markets, the factories here focused a lot on canning products like oysters, crab meat, and corn. Baltimore's products were shipped all over the US, putting the city on the map as a major player in the national food industry. Hey, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video about a piece of forgotten history. All right, back to the American Can Company. Now, the story of the American Can Company in Baltimore isn't just about technological innovations. It's about people. This factory was the lifeblood of the Canton neighborhood. Imagine being able to walk a few blocks from your house, clock in at the factory, and spend the day helping to produce cans that would ship out across the nation. The factory provided thousands of jobs to local residents, many of whom were immigrants from Europe. Canton became a working-class neighborhood, home to a diverse population of German, Irish, Polish, and Italian families. These immigrants were drawn to Baltimore because of the steady work in the city's factories, and the American Can Company was one of the largest employers in the area. For many families, working here was a way to achieve stability and a foothold in America. But factory work wasn't easy. Workers often spent long hours on the production line, handling repetitive tasks, and it wasn't uncommon for them to face tough working conditions, something that was pretty standard for industrial jobs at the time. By the early 20th century, though, there was growing unrest. Workers across the country, including right here in Baltimore, began pushing for better wages, shorter working hours, and improved safety conditions. The American Can Company was no stranger to these labor movements. In fact, some of the first major strikes in the canning industry took place right here in Baltimore. Workers demanded better conditions and eventually formed unions to advocate for their rights. In 1934, the can workers went on strike, part of a larger wave of labor unrest across the United States. This led to some important changes in how the industry was run, and over time, workers were able to secure better wages and benefits. It's important to remember that these fights for fair treatment weren't just local, they are part of a national shift in labor rights. Let's zoom out for a minute and talk about what this all meant on a larger scale. The American Can Company wasn't just about making metal containers. It was about revolutionizing how people access food. Before canning became widespread, most people had to rely on seasonal foods. If you wanted peaches in the winter, well, tough luck. But canned goods changed that forever. Suddenly, food could be preserved for months, sometimes even years, without losing its flavor or nutritional value. This was a game changer not just for families, but for entire industries. Canning made it possible for cities far from the coast to enjoy fresh seafood, for inland communities to taste fruits that were once only available locally, and for soldiers in wartime to have access to rations that wouldn't spoil on the battlefield. And let's not forget how much of this was tied to Baltimore's unique position as a canning hub. The seafood industry here was huge, thanks to the Chesapeake Bay, and companies like the American Can Company made sure that crabs, oysters, and clams could be canned and shipped across the country. Baltimore was known for its seafood long before the Old Bay craze, and a lot of it has to do with canning. The factory here in Canton churned out millions of cans each year, which would go on to be filled with everything from oysters to sweet corn. These products became staples in households nationwide, and they helped transform Baltimore into a national leader in food production. But with all industries, time and technology eventually caught up. The American Can Company couldn't stay on top forever. As the 20th century wore on, the demand for canned goods began to decline. New technologies like refrigeration and freezing became more widespread, and suddenly, canning wasn't the only option for preserving food. The American Can Company also faced increasing competition from other packing materials, things like glass, plastic, and cardboard. These alternatives were cheaper to produce and easier to handle, making them attractive to both manufacturers and consumers. By the 1960s, the writing was on the wall. The factory in Canton was no longer the bustling hub it had once been. It officially closed its doors in the late 1980s, and for years the building sat empty, a relic of a bygone era. Canton itself started to fall into decline as well. Without the jobs provided by the factory, many families struggled, and the area became one of the many Baltimore neighborhoods affected by urban decay. It wasn't until the 1990s that the factory found new life, when it was repurposed as part of Baltimore's urban renewal efforts. Today, the old American Can Company building is a shining example of Baltimore's ability to adapt and evolve. Where it was once a massive industrial complex is now a mixed-use space home to restaurants, offices, and retail space. The building's brick facade has been preserved, giving it a historic charm that connects the past with the present. This transformation is part of a broader revitalization of the Canton neighborhood, which has become one of Baltimore's most vibrant areas. It's a story of rebirth, really. While the factory no longer churns out cans, it remains a symbol of Baltimore's resilience. And let's not forget that it's also evidence of the city's industrial roots, which helped shape not only Baltimore, but the entire country. So there you have it, the story of how the American Can Company helped shape Baltimore and revolutionize the way America preserves and consumes food. From its early days as part of a corporate monopoly to its role in the labor movements and community building, the legacy of this factory is still felt today. If you enjoy this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode, where we uncover more hidden history from Baltimore and beyond. Thanks for watching. I'm Evan, and I'll see you next time.